This is the gruesome and mysterious story of Jesse Owens and his crew of hunters that went missing in the woods, never to be found again. Only remainings of him and his crew were recovered, but the more clues that came out, the more horrifying their end became. Jesse was a seasoned hunter, his prey ranging from deer to bears. One day, during a casual conversation at a local bar, his friends Mark, Matt, and Nick suggested an audacious plan to hunt salmon and grizzly bears deep within the northern woods, far from their community. They spoke of legendary tales of gigantic grizzlies roaming those parts, and how hunting one could elevate Jesse's reputation to the stuff of legends. Jesse, intrigued by the idea, agreed despite never having ventured that deep into the forest before. He was confident that his years of hunting experience would serve him well, oblivious to the unknown dangers lurking within the deep woods. Once he made up his mind, rallied his friends for the daring expedition. As they prepared to leave, they crossed paths with Akak, a revered native chief renowned for his wisdom. Upon learning of their plan, Akak intervened without hesitation, warning Jesse and his friends of the perilous nature of their venture. He cautioned them about the unforeseen consequences they might face for their audacity. Akak spoke of beings and spirits dwelling within those woods, entities beyond white men's comprehension. They wouldn't tolerate disrespect from intruders. As a respected Native American, Akak's wisdom was inherited from generations of his tribe and others, carrying the weight of centuries of knowledge and understanding of the natural world. He warned them that the grizzlies, formidable as they were, would be the least of their concerns if they provoked the wrath of nature in the uncharted depths of the woods. After hearing the cryptic warnings from the native chief, the crew of young hunters remained respectful towards Akak, but once they were out of earshot, they started to mock him, calling the old wise man crazy and full of fairy tales. The day of the hunt finally came. Jesse said a heartfelt goodbye to his wife Anna and his two young sons, Lucas and Diego. He picked up his Bowie knife, his rifle, and the rest of his equipment, and climbed into his truck. He was to meet his crew at the edge of town. Mark, Matt, and Nick, each in their respective trucks, decided to head towards the depths of the northern woods, ignoring the ominous warnings that Akak had given them about their ambitious plans. After 3 hours of travel, they were close to their destination when Mark spotted something that made his blood run cold. A figure stood far ahead, close to the road. It appeared to be a man, but there was something profoundly unsettling about him. He was unusually tall, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to sway slightly, even though there was no wind. His skin was as pale as the moonlight, and it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. His clothes were tattered and hung loosely on his skeletal frame, fluttering slightly as if they were alive, but it was his face that truly terrified Mark. It bore an empty expression, devoid of any human warmth or emotion. His eyes were pitch black, like two dark abysses, and they seemed to draw Mark in, making him feel as if he was falling into an endless void. The moment Mark made eye contact with this eerie figure, a wave of pure primal fear washed over him. It was as if every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run, to get as far away from this creature as possible. A sudden chill ran down his spine, making him shiver uncontrollably. It was a sensation he had never experienced before in his life, and as a seasoned hunter, it unnerved him deeply. He was in the last truck of the convoy, and he was certain his friends had seen the figure too. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, the figure was gone, as if it had vanished into thin air. The road behind them was empty, except for the long shadows cast by the towering trees on either side. Once they arrived at their campsite, Mark relayed his encounter with the strange figure. The rest of the crew listened in silence, their earlier bravado replaced by a growing sense of unease as they settled into camp and prepared for the hunt. Nervousness seemed to grip them, making them more alert than usual. Even Jesse, the most experienced of the crew, found this highly unusual. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the sunlight seemed to struggle to reach their location. It felt as if something was trying to block as much sunlight as possible. An eerie feeling of being watched settled over them. The laughter and jokes from earlier had long since faded, replaced by a heavy silence. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The woods, which had seemed so inviting in the daylight, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and unseen dangers. Jesse and his crew eventually reached a river, a sight that was truly awe-inspiring. The river was vast, its powerful current steaming with salmon, the waters so clear they sparkled like crystal. Grizzly bears were scattered around the area, hunting salmon, seemingly unbothered by the hunters' presence. The hunters began their hunt, blissfully unaware of the grave mistake they were about to make. Jesse, driven by ambition, hunted a grizzly bear in the area. He chose his target, took out his rifle, and fired a headshot, fatally wounding the bear. Then, he set his sights on another bear. His crew, noticing his recklessness, urged him to stop. They had achieved their goal and it was time to return to their trucks before nightfall. But Jesse had other plans. His ego overshadowed his sense of safety, and ignoring Akek's warnings, he decided to track down a larger animal. As they ventured deeper into the woods, disturbing occurrences began to unfold. An odd, unbearable smell, like that of a large animal's corpse, wafted from the depths of the woods. Disregarding the respect for the environment they were in, the hunters decided to hunt a large deer as well. Mark, one of the best hunters in the crew, took position, aimed at a large male deer, and fired a shot straight to its heart, killing it instantly. They celebrated their kill and decided to camp by the river for the night as the sun began to set. But something was amiss. A sensation of danger and fear crept into their bodies, as if their subconscious was warning them to retreat. When they reached the river, they noticed only 3 bears in the area, their behavior unusually agitated and nervous. This unnerved the hunters. As they knew, grizzly bears, being at the top of the food chain, were never afraid or defensive. The bears, upon noticing the hunters, retreated from the area, as if they were aware of something the hunters were not. Even the birds had stopped singing, leaving behind an eerie silence. Fear truly began to seep into the hearts of the hunters, the forest revealing its darker side, a chilling prelude to the horrors that awaited them as the sun began its descent. The breeze took on a sinister edge, slicing through the air with an eerie chill. They had hunted a deer, its carcass now gutted and ready to be cooked. Mark and Matt were tending to the cooking, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, while Jesse and Nick were finishing setting up the tents. Suddenly, a noise erupted from the depths of the woods. It was a cacophony of snapping tree branches and a strange, guttural voice that sounded like a scream amplified 1,000 times over. It originated no more than 20 meters away, sending a jolt of fear through Jesse and the crew. Jesse, who had been eager to hunt a large grizzly before dawn, found his bravado waning. The source of the noise was unknown, and its mystery instilled a sense of dread in Jesse and the rest of the crew. Undeterred, Jesse and Nick decided to explore the area, hoping to find tracks of a massive male grizzly bear they could hunt. As time passed, they scoured the surrounding area but found no answers. Instead, they were left with even more questions. The smell of fear was palpable, intensifying with every passing moment. The unknown danger they could be facing was a terrifying prospect. As night fell and darkness enveloped them, Jesse used a lantern to illuminate their path. He tried to lighten the mood, joking that whatever was making those sounds wouldn't dare to challenge him. But as they were returning to the campfire, where Matt and Mark were waiting, they heard something behind them. Turning around, they were met with a sight that left them frozen in fear. There it was, a grizzly bear of colossal proportions, standing on its hind legs. It easily towered over them, reaching a height of 6 meters. Jesse and Nick were awestruck. In all their years, they had never seen a bear of such dimensions, but something was off. The bear had an empty expression on its face and was eerily silent. It just stood there, staring at them with an intensity that sent chills down their spines. Its eyes were uncommon, its pupils dilated to an unnatural extent, as black as the void itself. The bear was unnaturally still, its silence more terrifying than any roar. Jesse turned to Nick, his voice barely a whisper. "That's not a bear. It's something else." The creature stood motionless, its stillness more terrifying than any movement. The 2 hunters, Jesse and Nick, were paralyzed. With fear, unsure of how the beast would react if they moved, Nick, the more cautious of the 2, warned Jesse not to shoot. But Jesse, reckless and brimming with overconfidence, ignored Nick's advice. Without a moment's hesitation, he fired a shot at the bear, aiming right between its eyes. Jesse's confidence soared, convinced that he had killed the beast instantly, but his triumph was short-lived. Within seconds, his overconfidence morphed into pure horror. The beast, far from dead, was now in a state of fury. It charged towards Jesse on all fours, its eyes blazing with rage. Nick, witnessing this terrifying sight, decided to take a shot, landing a bullet in the bear's left eye, but it did nothing to stop the beast. Before Jesse could even think of escaping, the bear swiped at him, sending him flying a few feet away. His face was torn, and many bones on the left side of his face were broken in the process. Nick, upon seeing Jesse's gruesome fate, tried to fire another shot, but it was too late. Jesse, now blind and in excruciating pain, could only hear the screams coming from Nick. He dragged himself to the strong current of the river. As an attempt at escaping a horrible death, he let the currents carry him away, leaving Nick to his fate. He floated until he was far enough away, and managed to grab onto a solid, long tree branch that brushed against his leg. With the last of his strength, he pulled himself out. Emerging from the river, Jesse was soaked to the bone, the biting cold gnawing at his skin. He was consumed by guilt for leaving his comrade, Nick, to his fate. He resolved to return or seek help from Matt and Mark, but the darkness had swallowed everything. He was lost, with no sense of direction. South, north, east, west all seemed the same in the pitch-black forest. As his adrenaline faded, the agonizing pain began to take over. He was dying, he knew it, armed only with a small lantern and without his rifle. He had never felt the power of a grizzly before, and he was certain that the creature they had encountered was no ordinary bear. Leaning against a tree, he waited for the sun to rise, but the night seemed endless. The silence was broken by the sound of steps and movement in front of him. He stood up immediately, pulling out his Bowie knife, his last line of defense. He used his other hand to illuminate the area with his lantern, but its weak light barely pierced the darkness. He saw nothing but darkness, heard nothing but silence, not even the hoot of an owl. He began to wonder just how deep into the woods he was. Then, out of nowhere, he heard a noise. It was human-like, a man murmuring. Fear gripped him, but he tried to appear strong. Then he saw it. A tall figure, unnaturally tall, with an odd and horrifying appearance. Its skin was so white it seemed inhuman. Its face was emotionless, with human-like features, but its eyes were empty. Its pupils were dilated to the point where its eyes looked completely black, staring straight at Jesse as if trying to penetrate his soul. Jesse knew he probably wouldn't be able to run away from it, but the worst part was when he noticed the wound on the middle of its forehead and the missing eye, the same places where he and Nick shot at the bear before. He couldn't speak, couldn't scream. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the creature. The creature started walking towards Jesse. Before he could think of running away or using his knife, it was already too late. As the night deepened, Matt and Mark were gripped by a growing sense of dread. Nick and Jesse had been gone for over 3 hours, and the silence of the forest was deafening. They had planned to stay the night, but the unexpected happened.
The quiet was shattered by the sound of rapid footsteps and the snapping of tree branches. Something was moving outside, fast and frantic.
Emerging from their tents, they found Jesse standing with his back to them, but something was horribly wrong. His skin was deathly pale, and he seemed taller. Half his face was a mangled mess, flesh hanging loose. Matt, seeing Jesse's injuries, moved towards him, but Mark stopped him. This thing wearing Jesse's skin was not Jesse. The creature that looked like Jesse turned at the sound of Mark's scream, asking Matt to get away from him. It moved with a speed and strength that was inhuman, grabbing Matt by the throat and dragging him into the darkness of the woods. Mark, in a state of panic, tried to fire a shot, but the creature was too fast. He was left alone, his friend taken by the creature. In his fear, Mark called the local police, giving them their location and telling them they were under attack. He then called his wife, telling her he loved her before hanging up. Armed with his rifle, he ventured into the woods to rescue Matt, but it was already too late. The sight that met him in the woods was beyond horrifying. Pieces of what used to be Matt were scattered around, a trail of blood leading deeper into the woods. He saw a femur, exposed and gleaming in the moonlight, and fragments of ribs. The further he walked, the more gruesome the sight became, until he came upon the last remnants of his friend, a pile of torn flesh and scattered bone fragments. Mark stood in shock, unable to comprehend the brutality of what he was seeing. Mark could not think clear as he saw his own friend become a pile of dead meat. Mark lost his mind and tried to run away. He only heard the creature mimicking the voice of Matt, asking him to come back. As dawn broke, the sheriff and a team of 4 officers arrived at the scene. The hunters' trucks and tents were still there, but the men were nowhere to be found. The officers began their search, and near the tents, they discovered a trail of blood that led them to a gruesome sight. A mutilated corpse, skin and bone fragments scattered around the area. That day, they came upon an even more horrifying sight by the river. A headless body, its ribs and vertebrae exposed, hung from a tree branch 100 feet above the ground. The stomach area was hollowed out, leaving only bones. Days turned into weeks, and the families of the hunters gathered in church, sending prayers for their lost ones. They prepared for a funeral with the scant remains they had. Mark's wife, in her sorrow, was startled one night by a knock on the door. She opened it to find her husband Mark standing there. Or at least, something that looked like Mark. The figure at the door had Mark's face, but something was wrong. He did not appear sad or even happy to see his wife. Fear gripped her, a primal instinct screaming at her to run. As weeks passed, rumors of what happened to the hunters in the unexplored depths of the northern forest began to spread. The wise Akak, a descendant of a Navajo tribe of great warriors, understood the truth. Families, fearing for their lives, began to leave the town. Those who stayed did so in fear, knowing they should never set foot in the cursed northern woods again. Akak visited the graves of the young hunters, bringing flowers and wine as a farewell to the other world. "I tried to warn you all, but you did not listen to me," he said. As he was about to leave, he saw Laura, Mark's missing wife, standing far away, her face expressionless. She vanished in an instant.